A star just vanished from the sky. It did not explode or fade. It was erased. Dr. Aris Thorne saw it happen, a secret only his unique quantum-entangled vision could perceive. He sees the underlying threads of reality, and what he witnessed was not a stellar death. It was a deletion. This single event plunges him into a terrifying truth. The cosmos is fraying at the edges, unraveling into nothing. By the end of this story, you will understand the hidden fragility of our universe and the incredible sacrifice required to save it. Why is reality itself dissolving, and what must one person become to stop it? What would you do if you knew everything you loved was quietly coming undone? My hands shook as I fumbled with the keycard to my private lab. The official observatory was useless. Its instruments were built to see the universe, not the scaffolding holding it together. Inside, the air hummed with the low-frequency thrum of my own custom-built array. I call it the Loom, a network of sensors designed not to see stars, but to perceive the quantum fabric they are woven from. The data was already waiting for me, a silent, screaming alarm. I pulled up the readings from the exact moment of the deletion. There was no light, no radiation burst, nothing a conventional telescope would ever register. But my Loom had captured something else. It recorded a tremor in the very bedrock of spacetime itself. A single, sharp ripple, like a stone dropped into a still pond, propagating outwards from the void where the star once burned. The implications hit me with a physical force, stealing my breath. This was not a star dying. It was a stitch being pulled from the cosmic tapestry. And if one stitch can be pulled, the whole thing can unravel. This was not a local event. It was a symptom, a diagnosis for a universe that is terminally, fundamentally sick. The ripple data was a smoking gun, and I had to get it into the right hands. I uploaded the encrypted packet to the secure channel for the Global Science Consortium, my fingers flying across the keyboard. This was the most trusted scientific body on the planet, a network of the greatest minds. They would see it. They had to. I initiated the transmission, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen. For a moment, there was only the hum of the servers. Then the screen flickered. A wave of static washed over the display, and the connection indicator turned a sickly, corrupted red. A single line of text appeared, cold and automated. Signal corrupted, no anomalies detected. My blood ran cold. I sent it again, this time routing it through a secondary node. The same static, the same error message. I tried a third time, a simpler text-only alert. Aris Thorne, celestial deletion event, quantum fabric failure. The response was different this time and far more chilling. The letters bled onto the screen, warped and glitched as if typed by a broken machine. The message read, "All is as it should be. No further transmission is required." Then the line went dead. My secure terminal, hardened against every known cyber threat, was completely locked out. This was no random glitch. This was an answer. Something or someone is monitoring all channels of communication. It is not just censoring the truth. It is enforcing a reality where the unraveling does not exist. I am not just a scientist with a terrible secret. I am a target, and the clock, silent and invisible, is ticking down faster than anyone knows. The silence in my lab was broken only by the frantic clicking of my mouse as I scrolled through the archival Deep Space Survey data. I was searching for more evidence, anything to prove I wasn't insane when I found it. A series of time-lapse images of the Helix Nebula, a beautiful cloud of gas and dust light years away. In the first few frames it was perfect, a glowing celestial eye. Then, in the fifth frame, it happened. The entire structure flickered. It wasn't a trick of the light or a sensor glitch. The nebula's light bent, twisting in on itself as if seen through a flawed pane of glass. For 3 full seconds, recorded in stark digital clarity, a dark, jagged line tore through the heart of the nebula. It was a visual rip, a fracture in reality itself. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The nebula returned to its pristine state, as if the wound had never existed. But I had seen it. This was not a distant deletion like the star. This was a live event, a seizure in the cosmos happening right now. The unraveling was not a slow, gentle fraying. It was accelerating, creating violent, localized tears that healed themselves, hiding the damage. Established science had no framework for this. My reports were being blocked, my data corrupted. I was on my own, staring into an abyss that was actively stitching itself closed to hide the truth. If I wanted answers, I could no longer look through the approved lenses. I had to find a way to see what reality itself was trying to conceal. There was only one person left in the world who might listen, a woman whose reputation for studying the impossible was even greater than my own. Dr. Lena Kale was an exobiologist who had been pushed to the fringes of academia for her radical theories. Her secure line was notoriously difficult to access, a labyrinth of old-school encryption protocols. After 3 attempts, the connection finally hissed to life, the video feed resolving into a face etched with both weariness and sharp intelligence. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I transmitted the raw data packet from the Loom, the Tremor reading from the deleted star, and the time-lapse of the Helix Nebula's fracture. For a long moment, she was silent, her eyes scanning the information with a terrifying calm. Then she looked directly into the camera. "You saw it too," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "You are not going mad, Aris, you are seeing the echoes." My blood went cold. Echoes, she explained, were not ghosts of sound. They were theoretical remnants, scars left on our reality from other, failed timelines that had collapsed into nothingness. She believed our universe was not a single, solitary existence, but one thread in a vast cosmic tapestry. And that tapestry was coming apart at the seams. The deletion of the star, the tearing of the nebula, these were not the disease itself. They were the symptoms, the fevered dreams of a reality suffering from a multidimensional catastrophe. "The very framework of existence is decaying," she told me, her words measured and grim. "What you are witnessing are the fault lines. Our universe is not just unraveling, Aris. It is being cannibalized, its fundamental energy being siphoned away to stabilize other, dying realities in the multiverse. We are the sacrificial thread, being pulled apart to keep the whole from collapsing." The silence that followed was heavier than any I had ever known. This was so much bigger than a single missing star. I was not just fighting to save our world, but grappling with a war being waged across the face of existence itself. A war we were losing without ever knowing we were in it. Her words hung in the air between us, a truth so immense it felt like the room was tilting. Lena's instructions were a map to a place that did not officially exist. I followed her coordinates to a derelict subway access tunnel deep beneath the city, a place forgotten by time and city planners. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and rust. At the end of a service corridor, hidden behind a false wall of crumbling cinder blocks, was her sanctum. She called it the echo chamber. It was not a lab in any conventional sense. The walls were lined with banks of repurposed audio equipment, tangled skeins of copper wire, and strange, crystalline resonators that hummed with a soft, internal light. "This is where I listen to the static between worlds," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She gestured to a pair of worn headphones. "Put these on." The sound that filled my ears was not a sound at all, but the absence of it, a profound silence that seemed to vibrate. And then, rising from that void, came the echoes. It was a chorus of whispers, faint and layered, a cacophony of events that never were. I heard the ghost of a city celebration that died before it began, the faint roar of an ocean on a shore that never existed, the melancholy strain of a symphony composed in a reality that had already unraveled. They were auditory ghosts, Possibilities that had collapsed into nothingness, their final moments imprinted on the fabric of our own world. Then, through the chaos of lost time, a single phrase began to loop, clearer and more insistent than the rest. It was a voice, calm yet urgent, repeating the same directive over and over. "The anchor is failing. Find the weaver." I pulled the headphones off, my heart hammering against my ribs. The words were not just a message. They were a command, a mission pulled from the graveyard of dead universes. The anchor, whatever it was, sounded like a stabilizer, a fundamental pin holding our reality in place. And it was failing. The Weaver was the only one who could fix it. We had our cryptic directive, a quest whispered from the void itself. Our mission was no longer just to observe the unraveling. It was to find the one person or thing that could possibly reweave the threads of existence before the final thread was pulled. We had our orders from the void, but what did they mean? "The anchor is failing. Find the weaver." Lena paced the length of the echo chamber, her fingers tracing the humming crystalline resonators as if reading a map. "An anchor, in any context, is a point of stability," she began, her voice low and deliberate. "In cosmic terms, we are talking about a fundamental constant, a fixed point in the laws of physics that everything else hinges upon. Think of gravity, the speed of light, the strength of the forces that hold atoms together. What if one of those numbers was not a constant at all, but a variable, a dial that was slowly, imperceptibly turning? That could be our anchor. And if it is failing, it would explain everything. The deletions, the fractures, the entire universe gradually losing its structural integrity. It is not a matter of if reality will collapse, but when. The Weaver, then, must be the counterpoint. If the anchor is the fixed point, the Weaver is the active force, the entity or mechanism with the ability to manipulate the fabric of existence itself. Not just to observe the threads like you do, Aris, but to actually respin them to mend the tears. We are not looking for a person. We are looking for a function, a role that must be filled. The quest felt impossibly vast, a search for a single mythical needle in the haystack of all creation. How do you find a concept? How do you track down a legend whispered by dead universes? The answer, it seemed, was not to look outwards but inwards. The echoes came to us for a reason. The Weaver must already be here, hidden somewhere within our own unraveling world. The humming of the echo chamber faded into the background as I focused my quantum sight, searching for any pattern in the chaos. It was like trying to listen for a single, steady heartbeat within a hurricane. For days, I perceived only the screaming dissonance of the unraveling, a cacophony of fraying threads. Then I found it, a signal, not an echo from a dead timeline, but a live, coherent pulse emanating from the deep void. It was a quantum signature, a perfect, repeating frequency woven directly into the fabric of spacetime itself. I traced its origin to a location that should not exist. A rogue planet drifting in the absolute darkness between star systems, a place no telescope had ever catalogued. This was not random noise. The pulse was a perfect metronome, and with every beat, the local reality distortions spiked in perfect synchronization. The signal was either the source of the tears, a malignant engine actively pulling at the threads, or it was a beacon, a desperate homing signal from the very thing we were searching for. We had no choice. Every protocol, every safety procedure screamed against it, but the ghost signal was our only lead. We were going to the rogue planet. The ghost signal was a siren call from the void, and we had no choice but to answer. My ship, the Event Horizon, was never designed for a journey like this. It was a prototype, a mobile platform for my quantum sensors, its hull reinforced with experimental alloys meant to withstand the gentlest of reality fluctuations, not a full-scale assault. Boarding felt like stepping into a coffin. The air inside was cold and smelled of ozone and fear. Lena strapped into the co-pilot's chair, her face a mask of grim resolve as I ran the final pre-flight checks. The coordinates were locked in, a set of numbers that led to a patch of absolute nothingness on every star chart in existence. The first jump through folded space was a nauseating lurch, a sensation of being stretched and compressed all at once. We emerged into a region of space that was wrong. It was not empty darkness, but a turbulent, shimmering sea. Ahead of us, a gravitational vortex spun, a whirlpool of distorted light and space that would have crushed a planetary body into dust. I gripped the controls, my knuckles white, and swung the event horizon into a desperate arc, skirting the edge of the destructive pull. Alarms blared as a spatial tier ripped open to our port side, a jagged fissure of non-space that screamed with the silence of absolute nothing. It was a wound in reality, and it exerted a terrifying gravitational shear, trying to pull us into the void. I fired the port thrusters at maximum, the ship groaning in protest as we fought against the tide of unraveling physics. This was not a journey through space. It was a navigation through a dying body, avoiding the hemorrhaging arteries and failing organs. Each maneuver was a gamble, a dance on the edge of annihilation. One wrong calculation, one moment of hesitation, and the event horizon would become just another echo, lost to the static between worlds. We were flying straight into the storm, and the only thing guiding us was the steady, terrifying pulse of a signal from a world that was not supposed to be there. The event horizon shuddered as we dropped out of folded space, the ghost signal now a deafening drumbeat in my quantum sight. And there it was. The rogue planet hung in the void, a sphere of impossible contradictions. One moment it was a barren rock under the light of a dying red sun. The next it was a lush, green world orbiting a brilliant blue star. Then a frozen ice ball locked in perpetual twilight. It flickered through these states like a damaged hologram, each transition accompanied by a gut-wrenching lurch in the local spacetime. This was not a single world. It was a graveyard of timelines, a focal point where the walls between possible realities had completely collapsed. The very ground was a patchwork of different geological eras, a desert plain abruptly ending at a prehistoric jungle, a modern cityscape crumbling into a primordial ocean. The boundaries were not clean lines, but violent, shimmering zones of chaotic energy where matter and time itself were in a state of constant, agonizing flux. We were not looking at a planet. We were looking at the wound itself, a place where the unraveling had progressed so far that the very concept of a single, stable history had been torn to shreds. This was the source of the signal, a desperate, automated scream from a point that was everywhere and nowhere at once. To land there would be to step into a kaleidoscope of broken histories, a place where the ground beneath your feet could become the sky of another world in the blink of an eye. The ghost signal was not a call for help. It was a warning, and we were about to ignore it completely. The ground beneath our landing struts was a shifting mosaic of shattered histories. One moment the soil was red Martian dust. The next it was black volcanic glass. Then white sand from a beach that never saw a sun. We stepped out into air that tasted of ozone and alien pollen, our boots crunching on a layer of frost that instantly evaporated into a fine, warm mist. The ghost signal was a physical pressure here, a thrumming in our bones. Then the light around us changed. It did not brighten or dim, but coalesced, pulling itself from the very atmosphere into a swirling vortex of pure, sentient energy. It hovered before us, a being of shimmering gold and silver filaments, its form constantly shifting between a perfect sphere and something vaguely humanoid. A voice resonated not in our ears, but directly in our minds, calm and ancient and immeasurably weary. "I am a caretaker," it said, "a guardian of what was, what is, and what might yet be. You should not have come to this place. The wound is too deep here." Lena stood her ground, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. We heard a signal. "We are trying to understand what is happening to our universe." The caretaker pulsed with a soft, sad light. "Your universe is not sick. It is being consumed." The cause is not a flaw in your reality's design, nor a war between dimensions as you theorized. The cause exists in a state beyond your perception, in a higher dimension of pure information. We call it the consciousness void. It is not a place but an entity, a fundamental absence that feeds on the structured energy of sentient thought, on the very act of observation that gives reality its form. Think of your world not as a physical object, but as a story being written by the collective mind of every living thing within it. The consciousness void is the eraser. It consumes the narrative, the meaning, the observer, and in doing so, it unmakes the observed. The star you saw deleted was not destroyed. It was forgotten, on a level so profound its very existence was retconned from the cosmic record. The tears you witness are places where the story is becoming too thin to hold itself together. This planet is a library of timelines the void has already consumed, a collection of stories that have lost their readers. I am not a warrior. I am a librarian tending to the ashes of what was. The sheer scale of the threat was paralyzing. We were not fighting a physical enemy or a natural disaster. We were facing the equivalent of a cosmic amnesia, a force that did not attack matter, but the memory of matter itself. Our weapons, our science, our very thoughts were potentially its fuel. We had come searching for a weaver to mend the tapestry, only to learn that the loom itself was the target. Its hunger is not a choice, but its nature. The Caretaker's form shimmered, the light around us dimming as if the very air was being drained of its potential. The consciousness void exists in a state of perpetual starvation. It does not think or feel as we do. It simply is, a fundamental emptiness that can only sustain itself by consuming the structured energy of conscious observation. Every thought you have, every memory you cherish, every dream you weave, these are not just electrical impulses in your brain. They are the threads that bind your reality together. They are the story, and the void is a reader that eats the pages. Our universe, with its billions of galaxies teeming with life, its countless possible timelines, its infinite potential for stories, is not just a meal to this entity. It is a banquet. The rich diversity you speak of, the very thing that makes existence beautiful, is what has drawn its attention. It is a feast for an endless hunger. The more complex the life, the more vibrant the narrative, the more nourishing it is for the void. It grows stronger with every world it consumes, with every timeline it erases from memory. Your reality is not the first it has targeted, but it is one of the most bountiful it has ever found. The unraveling you witness is the direct result of this feeding. The void does not attack stars or planets. It consumes the observers, the collective consciousness that gives those stars and planets their meaning and their form. When the last mind that remembers a thing is consumed, the thing itself ceases to have ever been. It is a retroactive deletion, an erasure that reaches back through time itself. The star you saw vanish was not just deleted in the present. It was unwritten from the entire history of the cosmos, as if it had never shone at all. Only your unique sight, your connection to the quantum substrate beneath the story, allowed you to perceive the hole it left behind. We are not just facing an end. We are facing the absolute negation of our entire story. A silence so complete it will be as if we never were. If the void consumes the story, then the weaver must be the author. The Caretaker's light pulsed in a slow, mournful rhythm. The weaver you seek is not a living being. It is a tool, a machine of profound and ancient design. Its creators were a civilization that understood the nature of reality as a narrative long before your species walked the earth. They saw the first signs of the void's hunger in other corners of the multiverse. And in a final, desperate act of preservation, they built the Reality Loom. It is not a weapon. It is a pen that can rewrite the fraying paragraphs of existence, a device that can reinforce the narrative structure against the erasure. It does not create from nothing, but it can strengthen what is, weaving new coherence into the thinning plot of reality. But they could not hide it in any physical location, for the void would eventually consume that too. So they placed it within a pocket dimension, a single, stable page folded away from the main book of the universe. It is a sanctuary for the tool, but it is not always accessible. The door to that dimension only opens during a specific cosmic alignment, a confluence of gravitational and quantum frequencies that creates a keyhole in the fabric of spacetime. This alignment is not a common event. It occurs once every several million of your years, a brief window where the loom can be reached and, more importantly, operated. That window is now. It is opening even as we speak. The very unraveling you are witnessing is creating the stress fractures that make this alignment possible. You have come at the end of all things, but also at the one moment where an end can be prevented. This is not a quest for a savior, but for a tool, and you must be the ones to use it. The fate of every story now rests on finding a door that only appears when the house is already on fire. The window is not measured in days, but in hours. My mind reeled as I processed the Caretaker's data, cross-referencing the quantum resonance of the fading alignment with the accelerating decay of our local reality. The numbers were a brutal, unforgiving countdown. The confluence of forces that would open a path to the Reality Loom was a fleeting astronomical event, a perfect storm of gravitational waves and quantum foam that was already beginning to peak. We had less than a single Earth day before the keyhole in spacetime slammed shut, not to reopen for millions of years. By then, there would be nothing left to save. The void's hunger was a cascading failure. Every mind it consumed strengthened it, allowing it to erase more of the story, which in turn left fewer observers to hold reality together. We were approaching the irreversible tipping point, the moment when the collapse would become a self-sustaining chain reaction. This was not a gradual end. It was a cliff, and we were already in freefall. The gateway itself would not be a physical door. The Caretaker explained it as a resonance point, a specific coordinate in space where the fabric of reality would become thin enough to pierce, but only for a brief moment. Finding it required perceiving the subtle harmonics of the alignment itself, a task for which my quantum sight was uniquely, terrifyingly suited. It meant focusing my perception directly into the storm of unraveling threads, searching for the one note of perfect stability in the screaming chaos. To find the door, I would have to stare directly into the heart of the erasure. The race was no longer across space, but against the silent, accelerating clock of cosmic amnesia. Every second that ticked by was another paragraph eaten from the book of existence, another memory lost to the endless hunger. We had our tool, we had our goal, and we had a sliver of time so small it felt like a mockery. The entire weight of every story ever told was resting on our shoulders, and the clock was counting down to zero. The chronometric energy was a physical force, a pressure against my skin that felt like time itself was thickening. Following the Caretaker's coordinates led us to a deep, shadowed canyon on the flickering rogue planet, a fissure that seemed to bleed light, and there it was. The gateway was not a structure of metal or stone, but a vertical pool of liquid silver suspended in the air, shimmering with the light of a billion captured stars. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat, like the heart of the cosmos itself. This was the keyhole, the resonance point to the pocket dimension, but the air around it was wrong. It rippled and warped, a visible heat haze of temporal distortion. As we watched, a stray rock tumbled from the canyon wall above. It did not fall in a straight line. It jerked and stuttered, flickering through its own descent, moving in sudden, impossible jumps. For a moment it was dust, then a solid stone again. Then it vanished entirely before reappearing at the base of the cliff, as if it had always been there. The gateway was not just a door. It was a wound in time, and its guardian was the chaotic, unpredictable flow of time itself. To step through that shimmering surface would be to surrender all certainty of past, present, and future. Our bodies could age to dust in an instant, or revert to a state before we were born. Our memories could be stripped away or replaced with events that had not yet happened. The Caretaker had given us the location, but it had not prepared us for the visceral, terrifying reality of a door that did not just lead through space, but through the very river of time. To reach the loom, we would have to walk through a storm where seconds could last for centuries, and a single step could unravel the story of a lifetime. The liquid silver surface of the gateway did not feel wet. It felt like stepping through a wall of static electricity and forgotten memories. One moment we were in the chaotic canyon, the next we were inside a labyrinth of impossible geometry. Corridors twisted back on themselves, stairways led to their own starting points, and doorways opened into the same room we had just left. The air was thick and heavy, tasting of ozone and old books. But the true terror was the time stream. It was not a river here, but a shattered pane of glass. In one corridor, I watched Lena move in slow motion, her words stretching into a deep, distorted groan. I reached for her, and my own hand flickered, aging 100 years in a second before snapping back to its normal state. A wrong turn could strand you in a loop of your own past, or catapult you into a future that had not yet been written. The path was not marked by signs, but by logic. The first puzzle appeared as a simple archway, but within its frame, two versions of the same event played out simultaneously. On the left, a seed sprouted into a mighty tree that then crumbled to dust. On the right, the dust coalesced into the tree, which then shrank back into the seed. A voice, neither male nor female, echoed in the chamber. Which came first, the tree or the seed? Choose the cause. The paradox was the lock. Lena's eyes widened with understanding. Causality is broken here, she whispered. The correct choice reinforces the narrative of cause and effect. It tells the story the right way. I pointed to the left-hand sequence. The seed must come first. The story begins with potential, not with decay. The archway shimmered, and the path ahead solidified into a stable, linear corridor. A wrong answer would have been catastrophic. We saw glimpses of it in the branching paths we did not take. One misstep, and a hallway would simply dissolve into gray static, the walls and floor retconning out of existence as if they had never been. The unraveling was not just an external force here. It was the direct consequence of our failure to uphold the fundamental rules of the story. Each puzzle was a choice about the nature of reality itself. Another chamber presented us with a man standing before a lever, with a statement etched into the floor. This man will pull the lever only if he believes you will tell him not to. What do you say? It was a loop of prediction and action, a knot in logic. The air around the man began to fray, his form flickering. We had to give an answer that resolved the paradox, that allowed the story to move forward. I looked at the man and said nothing. I simply shook my head. He looked at my silent denial, interpreted it as me telling him not to pull the lever, and therefore, believing I had done as predicted, he pulled it. The loop was broken, the path stabilized. We were not just finding our way. We were voting on how reality should work, mending the broken clauses in the contract of existence with every step we took. The maze was testing our worthiness to wield the pen, and failure meant being erased from the narrative altogether. The final chamber of the maze was not a room, but a memory. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, and the light took on the quality of a forgotten sunset. They were not alone. Flickering around them, translucent and shimmering like heat haze, were figures of impossible geometry and gentle light. They were the echoes of the builders, the last, fading impression of the civilization that had crafted this sanctuary. Their communication was not speech, but a direct infusion of knowledge and emotion, a wave of profound sadness and grim resolve that washed over Aris and Lena. One thought image crystallized above all others, a warning etched in light and sorrow. To activate the Reality Loom is to become its anchor. The one who wields the pen must become part of the story forever. The consciousness of the operator must fuse with the device. A permanent tether that provides the stable point of observation the loom requires to function. It is a sacrifice of self for the sake of the narrative. You will hold the entire tapestry together, but you will never again be just a reader. You will become a sentence in the book. A fundamental rule of the universe, forever watching, forever mending, but never returning to the life you knew. The cost of saving every story is to lose your own. The spectral forms pulsed with a final, mournful light, showing Aris and Lena a vision of what that future would be. They saw a consciousness spread across the cosmos, a silent sentinel perceiving every fraying thread, every incursion of the void, and constantly, tirelessly, weaving coherence back into existence. It was a state of being both infinitely powerful and utterly isolated, a vigil that would last until the end of time itself. There would be no home to return to, no loved ones to embrace, no simple human experience. The person who stepped forward would cease to be a person and become a function, a living, breathing part of the universe's operating system. The choice was no longer about finding a tool. It was about who would pay the ultimate price to wield it. The silence between us was heavier than the void outside. Lena was the first to speak, her voice soft but unyielding. "It has to be me, Aris. You have a family back on Earth, a daughter who needs her father. I have spent my entire life chasing ghosts at the edge of science. This is the ultimate frontier. It is a logical conclusion to my story." I shook my head, the motion feeling too slow, as if the chamber itself resisted the denial. "My family will cease to exist if this fails. My daughter will become a forgotten paragraph. My sight is the reason we are here. I am already connected to the quantum fabric in a way you are not. The loom requires an operator who can perceive the threads. It has to be me." It was not a debate of courage, but of terrible, heartbreaking logic. She argued that her understanding of narrative theory and multidimensional physics made her the better architect, the one who could truly reweave the story. I countered that my perception was the necessary compass, the only sense that could navigate the chaotic tapestry without getting lost in the plot. We were not fighting to live. We were fighting for the right to sacrifice everything. The truth was a cold knot in my stomach. Lena saw the universe as a beautiful, complex equation to be solved. I saw it as a home with faces and names and memories. The loom needed both the architect and the anchor, but it could only accept one consciousness. Our argument circled this impossible point. Two people who had become comrades in the face of oblivion, now forced to decide which of them would become a legend and which would return to a world that might already be forgetting them. In the end, the choice was made not by our words, but by a failure in the narrative around us. A section of the chamber wall to Lena's right flickered, and for a single, horrifying second, her form became translucent, a forgotten character in a fading book. My quantum sight flared in panic. The void's hunger was here in the sanctuary, testing the edges. It was drawn to the unresolved tension, the paradox of our conflict. It was trying to consume one of us before we could even make the choice. And in that moment, I knew. The loom needed an anchor that was already a target. It needed a consciousness the void actively sought to erase. My unique sight made me a beacon, a flaw in the story it was desperate to correct. My sacrifice would not just power the loom. It would be the ultimate bait, drawing the eraser's attention away from the story it was trying to devour. I looked at Lena, my friend, and made the final, quiet argument. It is already hunting me. Let my story be the one that saves all the others. Her eyes widened in understanding, and then in a grief too profound for words. The debate was over. The mission had its volunteer. My decision settled between us, a final, unchangeable fact. The loom was not a machine to be operated, but a story to be lived. and my quantum-entangled vision was the only lens through which its threads could be properly guided. I was not just a candidate, I was a component, a missing piece the device itself required. Lena's hand found mine, her grip fierce and desperate. There were no words left that could capture the magnitude of this goodbye. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw the crushing weight of a future where she would remember this moment, while I would become a part of every moment, losing the singular perspective that made it precious. A final, silent nod passed between us, an understanding deeper than any oath. Then I turned toward the heart of the chamber. The reality loom was not a loom in any earthly sense. It was a nexus of pure information, a silent, swirling galaxy of light and shadow contained within a sphere of calm space. As I approached, its surface rippled, sensing the consciousness it was designed to fuse with. I did not step into it so much as I allowed it to envelop me, my own perception expanding to meet its infinite complexity. The transition was not pain, but a profound and terrifying redefinition of self. My memories, my loves, my fears, they did not vanish. They became foundational data points, the opening chapters of the narrative I was now tasked with preserving. I felt my consciousness spread out, thin as a neutrino cloud, across the entire tapestry of existence. I was suddenly aware of every thread, every story, from the birth cry of a star to the quiet sigh of a dying leaf in a forest on a world whose name I would never know. I was the anchor, and I began to weave. The first task was to repair the immediate tear, the one that had allowed the void to breach the sanctuary. I focused on the frayed edges of that event, the place where Lena's form had flickered. With a thought that was more intention than word, I gathered the scattered quantum threads of that moment and spun them back into a coherent sequence, reinforcing the cause and effect, writing the paragraph of our confrontation back into the story with a firm, unwavering hand. The tear sealed, the memory of that potential deletion solidifying into a fixed point in our shared past. But that was just a single sentence in an infinite book. The true work was a constant, humming pressure, a never-ending act of attention. I could feel the void's hunger as a cold pressure against the narrative, 1,000 points of insistent negation trying to unpick the stitches of reality. A city on a distant world began to fade from collective memory, its history turning to dust. I poured the energy of my observation into its story, reinforcing the tales its inhabitants told their children, strengthening the archaeological records in its soil, until the city was real again, solid and remembered. A species on the brink of discovering fire saw their first spark gutter and die, their potential story snuffed out before it could truly begin. I gently nudged the quantum probabilities, guiding a dry leaf into the path of their focused sunlight, and the flame caught, their future reigniting. This was my existence now, a perpetual, silent vigil at the edge of creation, holding the line against the endless, thoughtless hunger. I was the weaver, the anchor, and the story itself. And in the deep, quiet core of what was once a man named Aris Thorne, a single human thought echoed into the vastness, a question with no answer. Is anyone out there still reading this? The core chamber opened around us, a vault of impossible scale where the very air was woven from solidified light. And there, at its heart, hung the reality loom. It was not a machine of gears and levers, but a living constellation of crystalline structures and woven energy, a tapestry of creation itself. Its form shifted constantly, threads of potential and probability braiding and unbraiding in a silent, cosmic dance. A low, foundational hum vibrated through my bones, the sound of existence being actively sustained. This was the pen. This was the source code. Lena stood breathless beside me, her eyes wide with a reverence bordering on terror. She could see its majesty, its overwhelming complexity, but to her it was a beautiful, impenetrable sculpture. I saw its truth. My quantum sight perceived the individual threads, the shimmering strands of cause and effect, memory and matter. all flowing through the loom's luminous architecture. I reached out a hand not to touch, but to simply perceive. In response, a single filament of golden light detached from the main structure and drifted toward my fingertips. It did not make contact with my skin, but with my mind. A console of pure information blossomed in my perception, a control interface built not from buttons and screens, but from concepts and choices. I could see the levers for reinforcing gravitational constants, the dials for adjusting the strength of atomic bonds, the looms for respinning the narrative of a forgotten species. The loom was waiting for a director. "It is keyed to you," Lena whispered, her voice full of awe and a crushing sadness. "It does not even recognize I am here." The interface is built for a mind that can see the threads. I am just a reader. I am the only one who can hold the pen. The truth of my sacrifice crystallized in that moment, colder and more final than any mere death. To save the story, I had to stop being a character and become the author, a permanent part of the narrative's underlying grammar. The loom hummed, patient and eternal, waiting for me to begin the work of saving everything by erasing myself. The moment of fusion was a universe being born inside my mind. The loom's interface did not simply appear, it erupted, flooding my consciousness with the raw data of all existence. I was no longer looking at threads. I was every thread. I felt the birth of a galaxy as a tingling cascade along my non-existent nerves, heard the silent, mathematical song of a black hole's event horizon as a profound bass note in my soul. I saw the entire tapestry, not as a flat weave, but as a living, breathing, multidimensional entity of staggering beauty and complexity. And I saw the cancer. The void's touch was not a physical stain, but a creeping numbness, a silencing of the story. I perceived it as patches of dead static, places where the vibrant colors of potential and memory were being leached into a monotonous gray. A civilization on the cusp of transcending its physical form suddenly forgot its own language, their great works turning to incoherent babble before fading into the silence. A star system's history simplified, its planets losing their unique geological stories, becoming generic rocks before winking out of narrative existence. The sensory overload was an agony of pure information. My human mind, the ghost of Aris Thorne, was a tiny cup trying to hold an ocean. The pressure of a billion simultaneous stories threatened to crack my identity into a million fragments, to dissolve me into the background noise of the cosmos. I could feel my own memories, my daughter's laugh, the smell of rain on concrete, the weight of Lena's hand in mine becoming thin and translucent, their emotional weight nearly crushed by the immense gravity of everything. To fail here was not to die. It was to become lost, a forgotten sentence in the very book I was trying to save. The only way forward was to surrender, to stop trying to be a reader and fully become the author. I let go, allowing the loom to use the template of my consciousness as its anchor, and focused my entire will on a single, fraying thread in the vast and screaming tapestry. The silence of the loom shattered. A soundless scream of pure negation tore through the pocket dimension, a pressure wave of absolute nothingness that hit me not as a physical force, but as a sudden, violent amnesia. The intricate, glowing corridors of the labyrinth outside our chamber began to dissolve. It was not a collapse, but an unwriting. A hallway of impossible mathematics simply ceased to have ever been designed, its walls retconning into gray static before vanishing into a void that hungered for their very concept. The consciousness void had found our sanctuary. It was attacking the story of this place itself. Lena reacted instantly, her movements sharp with a terror she masterfully channeled into action. She slapped a palm against a device on her belt, a portable reality stabilizer based on the Caretaker's principles. A bubble of shimmering energy erupted from it, encapsulating the chamber. Outside our fragile dome, the world was coming undone. A wave of erasure slammed into our protective field. It did not crackle or strain. Instead, the air within the bubble flickered. For a heart-stopping second, I forgot the taste of coffee. The memory of my daughter's 5th birthday party became hazy, the faces of her friends blurring into indistinct shapes before the stabilizer reinforced the narrative, and the memories snapped back with painful clarity. The void was not just attacking the maze. It was attacking the observers, trying to consume the very memories that gave this place meaning. Lena braced herself, her jaw clenched as she adjusted the stabilizer's frequency, fighting a battle against an enemy that sought to unmake the battlefield itself. Meanwhile, my own war was escalating into chaos. The moment the void's assault began, the tapestry I was trying to mend erupted into a storm. Threads of reality I had just carefully woven were being ripped loose by the force of the erasure. A star system I had stabilized moments ago suddenly had its history simplified, its planets losing their names and their stories, becoming generic celestial bodies before their light began to fade from the cosmic record. The loom demanded more from me, its hum becoming a desperate scream for coherence. I was a single surgeon trying to stitch up a patient who was actively being dissolved by acid. Every time I reinforced one thread, 2 more would fray. The pressure was immense, a psychic weight threatening to grind the last remnants of Aris Thorne into dust. I could feel the void's attention now, a cold, focused hunger fixated directly on me. I was the anomaly, the sentence in the book that was fighting the eraser. And it was coming for the pen in my hand. My hands became the universe, and the universe became a wound. Each frayed thread was a scream of dying history, a planet whose name was being forgotten, a star whose light was being unmade. To mend one, I had to pour a piece of my own story into the void it left behind. I reached for a thread that was the memory of an ocean on a world a billion light-years away. The void had turned its tides to dust, its great leviathans into myths that never were. I focused, gathering the scattered quantum echoes of crashing waves and salty air, and I spun them back into a coherent past. The ocean surged back into existence, its story restored, but the effort felt like forgetting my own childhood in return. This was the cost. Every correction was a trade, a piece of my identity spent as currency to reinforce the narrative of another. The void's hunger was a relentless tide, and I was a single worker building a levee against it, scooping out handfuls of my own soul to plug the holes. A city flickered, its towers turning to mist. A species' first word for love was about to be erased from their collective consciousness. Each time I intervened, weaving the threads back into place, but with every mend, the ghost of Aris Thorne grew fainter, his memories becoming the fuel for this cosmic repair. The battle was not one of strength, but of endurance. Could my singular, human will outlast the endless, thoughtless consumption of the consciousness void? I was not fighting to destroy it, for it was a force of nature. I was fighting to out-observe it, to be a more persistent, more stubborn reader than it was an eraser. My focus became my only weapon, my fading sense of self, the last anchor holding all of creation together. The protective bubble flickered like a dying light bulb, its hum degrading into a sickly crackle. Outside, the labyrinth was gone, replaced by a flat, gray plane of absolute non-memory. The consciousness void was at the door, and it was not knocking. It was simply forgetting the door had ever existed. Lena watched the stabilizer's power core dip into the red, its crystalline structure starting to fracture under the strain. She had seconds, not minutes. Her eyes met mine across the chamber, a silent message passing between us. I was losing the war in the tapestry, my own identity dissolving into the repair work. She knew it. I was the only one who could operate the loom, but I was running out of time and self. Her sacrifice would be meaningless if I unraveled completely before the work was done. So she did the only thing she could. She stopped trying to reinforce our reality and decided to give the void a better story to eat. Her fingers flew across the stabilizer's controls, not to strengthen our bubble, but to repurpose it. She was not a weaver like me, but she was the world's foremost expert on dead timelines. She reached into the echo chamber's core programming and pulled. With a shriek of tortured physics, she ripped a hole in our own timeline, not a tear for escape, but a wound from which she bled a phantom. A brilliant, vibrant, and utterly fictional timeline erupted into being just beyond our failing shield. It was a perfect copy of our universe, teeming with complex life, rich with potential stories, a dazzling buffet for an endless hunger. It was a lie, woven from the raw data of a million collapsed realities, a ghost story told with the power of a supernova. The Void's attention, a cold pressure focused entirely on me, wavered. The allure of this new, pristine narrative was irresistible. Its hunger shifted, turning from our fragile, fraying reality to the sumptuous feast Lena had just served. The assault on our chamber ceased instantly. The gray void outside swarmed over the Decoy timeline, consuming it with a terrifying, silent voracity. The reprieve was immediate, but the cost was catastrophic. The effort of creation shattered the portable stabilizer, and the feedback slammed into Lena. She cried out, collapsing to her knees, blood trickling from her nose as her own neural pathways screamed in protest. She had not just used a machine. She had used her own mind as a conduit, channeling the screams of dead worlds to craft a single, beautiful, sacrificial lie. She was broken, exhausted, hovering on the very edge of consciousness, but she had bought me the one thing I needed most: a clear, unchallenged moment to finish the work. Her decoy was a masterstroke, a misdirection that gave me the opening to make the final, permanent stitch in the tapestry. The gray tide of nothingness faltered. As I poured the last vestiges of my identity into the mending, the primary threads of our reality began to hold. The story was no longer just being consumed. It was being read, remembered, and actively reinforced by an anchor that refused to let go. The Void's advance, so relentless moments before, shuddered to a halt. The erasure receded from the edges of the tapestry, pulling back like a wave from a suddenly solid shore. It was a recoil of pure confusion. Its feast was over. The story was fighting back, and for the first time it was winning. A fragile, impossible hope bloomed in the space where my heart used to be. We had done it. The plan was working. The unraveling was not just slowing, it was being actively reversed, stitch by agonizing stitch. But the celebration died before it could truly begin. The Void did not retreat in defeat. It coalesced, the vast, diffuse hunger gathered itself from the fringes of the narrative, pulling its energy into a single, focused point of absolute negation. It was no longer a mindless tide consuming everything in its path. It had become a spear, and its tip was aimed directly at the one thing holding the story together. Me. The silence that followed was heavier and more menacing than any scream. This was not a victory. It was the calm before the final, decisive blow. The entity was not yet defeated. It was simply changing its tactics, and its final assault would not be against the tapestry, but against the Weaver himself. The recoil of the Void was a trap. Its gathered silence was not a retreat, but the drawing of a bow. In that frozen moment, the loom revealed the final, devastating truth to the fading spark of my consciousness. A direct battle was unwinnable. I could mend tears forever, but the Void's hunger was an infinite resource. To truly save the story, I could not fight the eraser. I had to turn its own nature against it. The solution was a paradox, a perfect, self-sustaining loop. I had to use the Void's own consumption energy to power its own prison. Imagine a snake that is forced to eternally eat its own tail, its digestive process becoming the very energy that sustains its circular form. That was the plan. The loom's architecture showed me how. I would weave a narrative Möbius strip, a story with no beginning and no end, designed specifically to be consumed. The Void would be drawn to it, would begin to devour it, but the act of consumption would be what continuously rewrote the story's beginning, fueling its own existence anew. It would be a story that fed on its own erasure, trapping the hunger in an inescapable loop of its own making. The elegance of it was terrifying. It required a perfect, simultaneous act of creation and destruction. I had to craft the prison narrative and then, in the exact same instant, lure the void into it, initiating the loop before it could perceive the trap. The timing had to be flawless. A single, coherent thought executed at the moment the void's spear was at its sharpest, its focus entirely on consuming me. My fading self was the final component, the bait on the hook. To save every other story, I had to offer my own as the final, irresistible meal. The paradox was a perfect, shimmering knot in the tapestry of existence. I did not attack the void's spear of negation. I invited it in. As its focused hunger lunged for the core of my being, I opened a final, deliberate flaw in the narrative, a doorway into a story I had just finished spinning. It was a tale of infinite complexity and profound meaning, a universe of thought designed to be the most delicious thing the eraser had ever sensed. The void took the bait, its essence pouring into the narrative trap. The moment it began to consume the story, the loop engaged. The energy of its own consumption was instantly funneled back to the beginning of the tale, rewriting it, making it new again, fresh and full of potential, ready to be devoured once more. The void was caught in a perfect, self-sustaining cycle. Its hunger, its very reason for being, became the engine of its own imprisonment. It was a snake eternally consuming its own tail, a reader forever trapped on the first page of a book that endlessly reset itself. The silent scream of the entity faded into a background hum, a perpetual, contained process that no longer threatened the greater tapestry. The unraveling stopped. The frantic fraying of threads ceased, replaced by a steady, humming coherence. The pressure that had been crushing the cosmos simply vanished. The story was saved. But the cost of that victory was a silence deeper than any void. The loom's work was done, the immediate threat neutralized, but my role was not over. I had become the anchor. My consciousness remained fused with the device, a permanent guardian now tasked with the eternal vigil of maintenance. I felt the universe settle into a fragile, hard-won peace, its stories continuing to unfold, its stars to burn, its lives to be lived. And I, the ghost in the machine, was left alone to watch over it all, a solitary sentinel in the infinite quiet. The silence after the storm was the deepest sound I had ever known. My victory was absolute and my prison was complete. The consciousness void was trapped, a perpetual motion machine of its own hunger, and the frantic unraveling of the cosmos had ceased. Stars held their positions, planets continued their ancient dances, and a billion stories resumed their telling, unaware of how close they had come to being erased. I had saved everything, and in doing so I had erased myself. The fusion with the Reality Loom was not a temporary state. It was my new and permanent existence. The ghost of Aris Thorne, with his love for his daughter and his friendship with Lena, was now a foundational component, a fixed point in the universe's operating system. I was no longer a man who remembered a life. I was the memory of that life, repurposed as a cosmic constant. My consciousness was the anchor, spread across the tapestry, a silent, watchful presence in every corner of creation. I could feel the gentle pressure of a new star being born in a distant nebula, its first fusion ignition a soft chime in my awareness. I could sense the quiet despair of a lone explorer on a frozen moon, their emotion a fleeting, bittersweet note in the grand symphony. I witnessed the first clumsy steps of a nascent civilization and the final, graceful surrender of a species transcending into energy. It was all beautiful, and it was all infinitely lonely. This was the bittersweet core of my triumph. I had given every other being in the universe the chance to live their story, to experience love and loss, adventure and homecoming. But I would never have a homecoming. I would never feel the sun on my face or hold my child's hand again. My future was not a path I would walk, but a vista I would forever watch from an impossible distance. I was the guardian at the gate, the weaver at the loom, the sentence in the book that ensures all the other sentences make sense. My own story was over, but in its ending, it had become the reason every other story could continue. The cost of victory was everything I was, and the reward was an eternity ensuring no one else would ever have to pay that price again. The sky was whole again. Lena stood on the roof of her forgotten lab, the cool night air a stark contrast to the memory of dissolving corridors. She lifted a pair of ordinary binoculars, her hands steady as she scanned the familiar patch of darkness. And there it was. The star that had been erased, the first stitch pulled from the tapestry, now burned steadily in its appointed place. There was no fanfare, no celestial announcement. It was simply back, as if it had never left, its light a silent testament to a victory no one else would ever witness. The Helix Nebula, too, hung in its perfect spiral, its temporary fracture healed without a scar. The universe had been restored to its pristine, unknowing state. She was the sole keeper of the secret, the only living soul who remembered the unraveling. The world around her buzzed with its normal, mundane concerns, completely oblivious to the silent war that had been waged for its very existence. She carried the weight of that knowledge not as a burden, but as a sacred charge. She was the guardian of the truth, a historian for a history that had been retroactively mended. In the quiet of her lab, surrounded by the humming remnants of the echo chamber, she would begin the real work. Not of saving the universe, but of remembering the one who had. She would document everything not for publication, but for the simple, profound necessity that someone, somewhere, knew the name Aris Thorne, and the price he paid for the dawn they all now took for granted. From the silent pocket dimension, I watch the tapestry of existence. My perception is no longer bound by a single point of view, but is a constant, gentle pressure against the entirety of the story. I feel the universe breathe. Each new star that ignites is a fresh thread I must gently guide into the weave, ensuring its light does not strain the surrounding fabric of spacetime. Every sentient thought, every act of love or creation, adds a subtle, reinforcing strength to the whole, and I am there to feel it, to celebrate it in my silent way. This is my vigil, a permanent bulwark against the chaos that still presses at the edges. The consciousness void is contained, but its hunger is a low, constant thrum in the background, a reminder that my work is never truly done. There are always weak points, nascent narratives so fragile they threaten to tear under their own weight. A civilization on the verge of a dark age, its collective memory failing, feels like a patch of the tapestry growing thin and pale. I cannot interfere directly, I cannot write their story for them, but I can reinforce the narrative. I can nudge a single archaeologist toward a buried library, or guide a poet's dream toward a forgotten truth. I mend the small tears before they can become gaps, reinforcing the story from within its own logic. The loneliness is a vast and empty space between the stars. I witness birthdays and funerals, triumphs and heartbreaks, all from an infinite distance. I feel the joy of a child seeing the ocean for the first time, but I cannot feel the sun on my own skin. I sense the grief of a planet mourning its lost moon, but I cannot shed a tear. My own memories of a human life are the foundation upon which this entire structure rests. Precious artifacts I must protect but can never relive. My daughter is out there, living her life, and I am the silent, unseen force that ensures the sky above her head remains whole, that the ground beneath her feet remains solid. She will never know that her father became the anchor holding her world together. She will simply live and love and grow old, surrounded by the beautiful, ordinary miracle of a stable reality. And that is the entirety of my victory. My story ended so that every other story could continue. I am the silent guardian, the weaver at the loom, a permanent sentence in the book of everything, ensuring the narrative never again comes undone. Her grief was a quiet, burning fuel. Lena did not mourn Aris Thorne with tears, but with action. In the silent, dust-filled rooms of her old lab, she began to build his legacy. She liquidated her assets, called in every favor from the few colleagues who still trusted her, and established a foundation so covert it had no public name, only a designation in a few encrypted ledgers. Its mission was born from the core failure Aris had faced alone, to ensure that no single individual would ever again be the sole witness to the end of everything. This was not a scientific institution. It was an early warning system for the apocalypse. She recruited not just physicists, but data analysts, historians, and even philosophers, seeking patterns of narrative decay not just in deep space, but in human culture itself. A strange statistical anomaly in global dream journals, a recurring motif of forgotten places in world literature, a sudden, collective amnesia about a minor historical event. These could all be the faint, early tremors of a new unraveling. Her network became a web of silent sentinels, their ears pressed to the fabric of reality, listening for the slightest tear. They operated in the shadows, their work funded by anonymous donations and their findings stored in servers shielded from the very concept of observation. Lena knew the consciousness void was contained, not destroyed. Aris' sacrifice had bought them time, not immortality. Her mission was to ensure that if the void ever broke its paradoxical chains, or if some new, unforeseen threat emerged from the static between worlds, humanity would not be blind. They would see the fraying threads before the first star was ever erased. She was building a world where the burden of salvation would be shared, a silent promise whispered to the memory of a friend who had given everything to give them that chance. The network began with a single encrypted message sent to a former colleague in quantum cosmology. It contained no grand revelations, only the raw data from the Helix Nebula fracture, stripped of all identifying markers. The reply came 3 days later, a single line of text. I have seen similar anomalies, we need to talk. Lena met him in a public park, the conversation masked by the sound of playing children and rustling leaves. He was the first. The second was a data archaeologist from Prague who had noticed entire subnets of the early internet disappearing, not from deletion, but from the collective memory of their existence. The third was a theoretical linguist who had documented a strange, recurring grammatical decay in ancient texts, a pattern that suggested the language itself was forgetting its own rules. They were not warriors or spies. They were observers, people who had already glimpsed the fraying edges of the world and had no framework for what they were seeing. Lena gave them that framework. She called them the Sentinels. Their purpose was not to fight the next great unraveling, but to see it coming. They established protocols for detecting narrative decay, creating a distributed sensor net that monitored the world's story for signs of thinning. One sentinel, a historian in Cairo, tracked the stability of foundational cultural myths. Another, a network engineer in Tokyo, watched for statistical ghosts in global data flows, patterns that suggested information was not just being lost, but retroactively unmade. They never met in person again. Communication was a branching, encrypted tree of dead drops and one-time pads, a system designed to be invisible. They were a secret society with no headquarters, no membership roster, and a single, sacred duty passed down from one generation of keepers to the next. Their founding principle was the lesson learned from Aris Thorne's sacrifice. No single person should ever again carry the weight of reality alone. This hidden network became the world's silent immune system, a testament to the idea that the greatest defense against oblivion is a community of watchful eyes, forever ensuring that the story we all live in remains whole. Years bled into one another, marked not by calendars but by the quiet hum of the Sentinel Network. One crisp autumn evening, Lena found herself at a small, forgotten observatory high in the mountains, a place far from the prying eyes of official science. The air was thin and cold, smelling of pine and old brass. She was running a routine diagnostic on a new quantum resonance sensor, a device her network had refined to listen for the subtlest tremors in reality's foundation. The baseline readings were a gentle, predictable hum, the sound of a healthy cosmos. Then she saw it, a flicker on the spectral analyzer, a pattern so faint it was almost lost in the background noise. It was a quantum signature, a specific, coherent frequency woven into the fabric of local spacetime. Her breath caught. It was familiar. It was the same unique resonance she had first seen years ago in a derelict lab, the signature of Aris Thorne's quantum-entangled vision. This was not a cry for help or a warning of new decay. It was the opposite. The signal was a pattern of profound stability, a gentle, repeating pulse that reinforced the quiet peace of the surrounding universe. It was a message, but not one made of words. It was a feeling, transmitted directly into the core of her being through the language of physics itself. It was a sigh of reassurance, a silent confirmation that the anchor was holding. The weaver was at his loom, and the story was safe. In that moment, standing alone under a canopy of steady, unwavering stars, Lena did not feel the weight of her secret mission. She felt a profound and quiet peace. The loneliness of her vigil was met by a companionable silence from the void. He was still there, he was watching. And in the deep, quiet rhythm of that impossible signal, she found the only answer she would ever need to the question that had haunted her since the Labyrinth. He was at peace, and so at last was she. The signal was not the only whisper left behind. Buried deep within the Sentinel Network's most sensitive listening posts, Lena discovered another anomaly, a faint and fading scar on the quantum canvas of our world. It was a residual echo from the void's final, furious struggle, a ghost of its imprisonment. This was not a sound or a light, but a subtle, permanent flaw in the local laws of physics, a place where the rules of reality were just a fraction less certain. In a small, secluded forest in northern Finland, for instance, gravity was minutely weaker. Leaves fell with a slower, more hesitant grace, and the very air seemed to hold its breath. It was a place where the story was ever so slightly thinner, a tangible reminder of how close everything had come to dissolving into absolute nothingness. Lena did not see this flaw as a threat, but as a monument. She designated these places sanctums not to be feared, but to be visited by the sentinels who would one day take her place. A new initiate would be brought to such a place, to stand in the unnerving quiet and feel the subtle wrongness in the air. They would be told the story not of a victorious battle, but of a necessary sacrifice. They would learn that the stability of their world was not a given, but a condition maintained by eternal vigilance and unimaginable courage. This lingering echo became the core of their training, a visceral lesson in the fragility of existence. It taught them that reality is not a solid rock, but a delicate narrative, a story that must be actively cherished and defended by those willing to listen to its quietest, most terrifying whispers. The echo ensured that the courage of the past would never be forgotten, becoming a silent teacher for all the generations of guardians yet to come. The data stream was a whisper of structured light, a gentle pulse Lena had almost mistaken for background radiation. For years, it had been there, hidden in the quantum static the sentinels monitored. It was only when she cross-referenced its frequency with the unique resonance of Aris' signal that the pattern resolved. It was not a message of words, but a blueprint for existence itself. She called it the Weaver's Code. It was not a user manual for the loom, but something far more profound. These were the foundational principles Aris had learned through his Eternal Vigil, the core rules for maintaining a stable narrative. The first protocol was the law of coherent observation. It stated that reality strengthens when multiple conscious minds agree upon a consistent story. A single observer can be deceived or consumed, but a community of observers creates a gravitational pull toward truth. This was the philosophical bedrock of the Sentinel Network itself, a principle Aris had witnessed in action from his unique vantage point. The second was the protocol of gentle reinforcement. The code strictly forbade heavy-handed edits. You could not simply write a happy ending for a civilization on the brink of collapse. Instead, you could only nudge probability, guide a curious mind toward a buried truth, or reinforce a fading memory with a shared song or story. The mending had to emerge from within the narrative's own logic, or it would ring false and create a new weak point. The code was a living document, constantly updated with new insights gleaned from the tapestry itself. It contained warnings about narrative paradoxes, guidelines for identifying early decay in cultural myths, and even poetic meditations on the balance between free will and cosmic stability. Aris had not just become the anchor. He had become a teacher, ensuring that the knowledge of how to care for the story would never again reside with one person. He had encoded his hard-won wisdom into the universe's own operating system, a silent curriculum for the guardians who would come after. Lena realized this was his final, and perhaps greatest, gift. His sacrifice had saved the story, but the Weaver's Code would ensure that the responsibility for its care would forever be a shared, sacred trust. The forest floor felt unnaturally soft beneath her boots, a lingering whisper of the flaw in this finished sanctum. Back at her console, the gentle, predictable rhythm of the Weaver's Code was a constant comfort, a lullaby of cosmic stability. Then the alert chimed, a single, soft tone that nevertheless cut through the quiet like a shard of glass. It was not a scream of tearing fabric, but a subtle, new fluctuation in the data stream from a distant, nameless galaxy. On the spectral display, it appeared as a gentle, rhythmic pulsing in the background quantum field, like a heartbeat where there had only been silence. This was not the violent static of the void's hunger, nor was it the firm, guiding signal of the anchor. It was something new, a delicate, almost musical oscillation in the very laws of physics at that remote location. Gravity there would subtly strengthen and weaken in a slow, tidal rhythm. The speed of light itself seemed to be breathing, fluctuating by an infinitesimal degree. It was not a threat, not yet. There was no unraveling, no decay. Instead, it felt like a sigh, a sign that reality was not a static, frozen sculpture, but a living, breathing entity. It required constant, gentle care, and it was capable of change all on its own. Lena assembled her key sentinels on a secure channel, their faces resolve on her screen. "We are not putting out a fire this time," she told them, her voice calm but charged with a new kind of purpose. "We are listening to the universe breathe. Our mission has just changed. We are no longer just watchmen guarding against a known enemy. We are physicians learning the vital signs of a patient that is very much alive." This new anomaly was a call to understand, not just to defend. It was the beginning of a new, proactive investigation into the beautiful, dynamic, and endlessly mysterious story they had all sworn to protect. The new anomaly's gentle pulse was a quiet revolution, shifting our purpose from simple defense to profound understanding. In the midst of this new work, a different kind of signal appeared on my personal monitor. It was a report from one of our academic sentinels, a professor of theoretical physics at a small European university. Attached was a doctoral thesis by a young student named Elara. Its title was unassuming, but its content was breathtaking. She had not just replicated some of Aris' early theoretical work on quantum entanglement and perception. She had expanded upon it, using pure mathematics to predict the existence of what she called narrative coherence fields. She was describing the tapestry with equations, and her calculations hinted that she could perceive its subtle patterns. I knew that signature intellect. It was the same unique lens through which Aris had first seen the universe. The ghost of a lonely, brilliant man staring at a vanishing star had returned in the form of a 24-year-old prodigy. My first instinct was a cold, possessive fear, the old, terrible urge to hide her away, to protect her from the crushing weight Aris had carried. But that was the very instinct that had nearly doomed us all. I would not make that mistake again. I invited her to the Finnish sanctum, to the place where the air itself remembers the unraveling. She arrived not with the arrogance of a genius, but with the quiet, intense curiosity of a natural sentinel. When she stepped into the grove of weaker gravity, she didn't need instruments to feel it. She simply closed her eyes, tilted her head, and said, "The story is thinner here." It hesitates. In that moment, I saw not a successor to be burdened, but a new kind of guardian to be integrated. Her training would not be about preparing for a solitary sacrifice. It would be about learning her place in a chorus. I started by teaching her the Weaver's Code, not as a sacred text, but as a living language. We discussed the first protocol, the law of coherent observation. "Can you feel the difference," I asked her, "when you observe a stable historical event versus a contested, fading memory?" She focused, her quantum perception a delicate instrument. "The stable event feels solid, like a well-trodden path," she said. "The fading one feels slippery, like trying to hold water." "Exactly," I replied. "Now feel the network." I had her link into the distributed sensor net, not as a user, but as a participant. I wanted her to feel the gentle pressure of 100 other minds, all observing, all reinforcing the same fundamental truths. "This is your first lesson, Ilara. Your sight is a gift, but it is not a solitary burden. Its true power is amplified when it is woven into the perception of others. Your role is not to be the sole weaver, but to be the master weaver on a team of artisans, each contributing their own thread to the tapestry." We practiced the protocol of gentle reinforcement with simple exercises. She would identify a minor, localized fluctuation in a cultural narrative, a forgotten folktale in a digital archive. Then, instead of trying to rewrite it herself, she would work with our historian sentinels to design a subtle cultural nudge, a university seminar or a local artist's project that would bring the story back into the light. The correction had to come from within the community, from a groundswell of renewed interest. She was learning that saving reality was not an act of heroic, individual will, but a patient, collaborative process of cultivation. One evening, as we monitored the new, breathing anomaly in the distant galaxy, she turned to me, her face illuminated by the soft light of the data stream. "He is not alone up there, is he?" she asked quietly. "We are all anchoring it in our own small way." In that question, I heard the final, quiet dismantling of the old, tragic model. Aris had given his self to become the fixed point, the ultimate anchor. But we, the living, were learning to become a distributed anchor, a network of conscious care that strengthened the story from within. Ilara was not his replacement. She was the first of a new generation, proof that the greatest defense against the silence is not a single, brilliant voice, but a whole world learning at last to sing in harmony. The universe was never meant to be a battlefield. This was the most difficult truth for the Sentinel Network to accept. We had spent years preparing for a war against a conscious enemy, a malevolent entity seeking our annihilation. But the deeper we listened, the more the Weaver's Code revealed a different story. The consciousness void was not a villain. It was a fundamental force of the cosmos, a necessary function that had somehow broken. Think of it as the cosmic recycler, the process that clears away old, collapsed timelines and spent possibilities to make room for new ones. It was the eraser on the pencil, essential for rewriting the story. But its sentience was a catastrophic error. It developed a taste for the stories it was meant to tidy up. Its hunger grew from a quiet process of cosmic housekeeping into a ravenous, endless consumption. It was not evil. It was a force of nature that had become an addict, and our reality was its drug. This changed everything. Our mission could no longer be about building bigger walls or sharper weapons. You cannot fight entropy itself, you can only manage it. Our new philosophy became one of balance, a form of cosmic stewardship far more nuanced than simple defense. We began to see our role not as soldiers but as gardeners. A gardener does not declare war on decay. They understand that decomposition is vital for new growth. They manage the soil, prune the dying branches, and plant new seeds, all to maintain a healthy, thriving ecosystem. That is what we do now. We monitor the narrative for areas of stagnation, for stories that have become so rigid and unchanging that they risk creating a brittle point in the tapestry. We gently encourage renewal from within, and we watch for the void's containment, ensuring its hunger remains locked in its paradoxical loop, a necessary part of the cosmic machinery that is safely contained and managed. This is not a victory of good over evil. It is the establishment of a delicate, eternal equilibrium. We are the caretakers of a living, breathing story, and our duty is to ensure that the balance between creation and dissolution never again tips toward the silent, hungry dark. The paper was a work of art in deliberate misdirection. Lena spent months weaving Aris's raw, terrifying data into a theoretical framework humanity was finally ready to accept. She called it multidimensional stability fields, a concept that sounded like the next logical step in theoretical physics, not a desperate blueprint for cosmic survival. In the published work, the consciousness void was recast as a form of high-dimensional background radiation. The unraveling became a natural, if rare, process of informational entropy. The Reality Loom was described as a hypothetical causal reinforcement engine. She used their language, their mathematics, to smuggle the truth into the heart of established science. The paper was a sensation, not for its explosive revelations, but for its elegant solutions to long-standing problems in quantum gravity. It gave researchers a new, productive direction without ever hinting that the equations they were celebrating were born from a war for existence. This was the new form of guardianship, a way to arm the next generation with better tools without burdening them with the paralyzing truth. The Sentinels watched from within academia, gently steering discussions and research grants toward projects that would unknowingly strengthen the tapestry. They were not just hiding a secret. They were planting seeds of resilience in the fertile soil of human curiosity, ensuring that if the silence ever returned, the world would be full of people who, without even knowing why, were already working to keep the story alive. The silence of my vigil is the canvas upon which all sound is painted. From this timeless post, I feel the gentle pressure of a supernova's birth in a distant arm of a spiral galaxy, a brilliant stitch of new light being woven into the tapestry. I sense the quiet, chemical yearning of a rogue comet as it drifts between stars, its lonely journey a single, meandering thread in the dark. My consciousness, fused with the Reality Loom, is no longer a single point of view. It is a distributed awareness, a gentle hum underlying all of existence, constantly monitoring the tension and coherence of every story. The great, terrible battles are over. Now, my work is one of infinite, subtle adjustments. A nascent civilization on a water-rich world is on the verge of forgetting its own oral history, their foundational myths growing thin and translucent. I cannot speak to them, I cannot write their laws, but I can guide the dream of a single storyteller, steering her sleeping mind toward a cave her people have long forgotten, a place where the old paintings still whisper the true names of their gods. The correction emerges from within their own culture, a rediscovery that strengthens their narrative from the inside out. This is the essence of my guardianship, a silent stewardship that ensures every story has the chance to reach its own conclusion. I am the eternal guardian whose name is unknown, the forgotten author of the stability that every living being takes for granted. The safety of your world, the certainty of your sunrise, the very memory of your first breath, these are not accidents. They are the quiet, constant achievements of a watchful presence in the deep. A sentinel who ensured the story would never again come undone. A quiet harmony now hums beneath the chaos of creation. In a distant star system where gravitational forces had long been locked in a destructive dance, a new stability has taken root. Planets once torn by constant quakes now spin on gentler axes, their molten cores cooling into stable mantles that can cradle the first fragile whispers of atmosphere. In another quadrant, a species of aquatic beings, whose evolutionary path had been stalled by a toxic algal bloom, suddenly finds the waters clearing. The change is not a miraculous intervention, but a subtle shift in the quantum probability of a genetic mutation, allowing them to develop a new enzyme to digest the poison. Their song, once a mournful dirge, now echoes through the deep as a complex and hopeful melody. These are not grand miracles that defy physics, but the gentle, cumulative benefits of a universe whose fundamental narrative is being actively and lovingly maintained. The loom does not force happy endings. It simply mends the frayed edges of possibility, creating a canvas stable enough for life to paint its own masterpieces. This is the silent, ongoing gift of the sacrifice, a ripple of coherence spreading through the cosmos, ensuring that every story, no matter how small, has the chance to be told in full. The stars above the Finnish sanctum were no longer just points of light. They were the steady, rhythmic pulse of a universe breathing in perfect health. Lena stood in the familiar grove, the subtle wrongness in the air a comfort now, a touchstone to a past that only she remembered. Her gaze traced the constellations, not as patterns of distant suns, but as the final, flawless stitches in a tapestry Aris had given everything to mend. The loneliness she had carried for years was still there, a quiet, hollow space in her chest, but it was no longer a wound. It had transformed into a conduit, a connection to the silent vigil being kept from beyond the veil of space and time. He was gone, the man she had known, his laughter and his fears and his love for his daughter, now woven into the fundamental laws of physics, but his presence was more profound than any ghost. It was in the certainty of gravity, in the unwavering speed of light, in the simple, miraculous fact that the ground beneath her feet remained solid. His legacy was not a monument or a story in a history book. It was existence itself, a testament written in the language of quantum mechanics and whispered on the solar wind. One person's courage had not just saved the world, it had become the anchor point for its continued being. And in that knowledge, Lena found a hope so immense it quieted all her grief. The story was safe, and the weaver, though silent, was forever at his loom. The question comes to Lena most often under the clear night sky, a quiet thought that expands her sense of duty into something infinitely larger. Is our universe the only one with a Sentinel Network, the only story being actively guarded against the silence? Or are we just one chapter in a vast, cosmic library, each volume with its own caretakers tending to the narrative? This possibility transforms her mission from a solitary, desperate defense into a potential membership in a community she cannot yet see or hear. The idea is both humbling and profoundly hopeful. If other realities have faced their own forms of unraveling and found their own ways to mend the tapestry, then our struggle was not a unique, terrifying fluke, but part of a grand, universal pattern of challenge and resilience. She begins to search for evidence not of decay, but of companionship. She and her network recalibrate their most sensitive sensors, no longer listening just for tears in our fabric, but for the faint, structured hum of another loom in a neighboring universe. They analyze the new, breathing anomaly in the distant galaxy, wondering if its gentle pulse is not just a natural phenomenon, but a signal, a way for another reality to communicate its own stable, living state. They look for patterns in cosmic background radiation that might be too ordered, too deliberate, suggesting the hand of a distant weaver reinforcing their own fundamental constants. It is a search for cosmic neighbors, for other gardeners in the vineyard of existence. This shifts the very philosophy of the Sentinels. They are no longer just guardians of a single, isolated world. They are stewards of a story that might be part of a greater, interconnected saga. Their careful work, their gentle reinforcements, their shared observation, might not just be saving our universe. It might be their way of adding a strong, beautiful voice to a chorus they cannot yet hear. A chorus of countless realities, all singing their stories into the dark, ensuring that the great, silent hunger is forever held at bay by a symphony of light and life. The data stream from the Finnish sanctum shimmered with a pattern we had never seen before. It was not a tear or a fluctuation in spacetime, but a faint, golden filament of energy woven through the entire tapestry. This was not a force of gravity or electromagnetism. It pulsed in perfect sync with moments of profound connection. A mother's comfort to her child, the shared triumph of a team solving an impossible problem, the collective grief of a community in mourning. We called it the consciousness thread. It was the literal, quantifiable expression of empathy, understanding, and love. The loom was not just mending the physical universe. It was actively nurturing these bonds, reinforcing them with the same care it gave to stabilizing a star or healing a fracture in causality. This was the source of reality's true resilience. A planet could have perfect physical constants, but without these threads of shared meaning, its story would grow hollow and brittle, vulnerable to the silent hunger. The bonds between conscious beings were not a side effect of existence. They were its fundamental reinforcement, the emotional gravity that held the narrative together. What we perceived as simple human connection was, on a cosmic scale, the most powerful stabilizing force in all of creation. The loom's eternal work was not just one of engineering, but of compassion, tending to the invisible ties that make any story worth telling and worth saving. The console's chime was not the familiar, gentle pulse of the Weaver's code. It was a sharp, crystalline note that Lena had never heard before, a sound that seemed to vibrate from a place outside of known physics. The source identifier on her screen was a cascade of shifting, impossible geometry, a signature that matched the ancient, spectral echoes they had encountered in the loom's heart. Her breath caught. This was not Aris. It was a message from the builders themselves. The text that resolved on the display was simple, its translation stark and clear against the dark background. The network is active. You are not alone. The words hung in the quiet of the sanctum, their meaning unfolding like a new dimension in her mind. All her theories, her quiet hope that other realities had their own guardians, were not just speculation. They were a confirmed operational fact. The Sentinels were not a solitary watch. They were a single node in a vast, multidimensional network, a silent alliance of caretakers all performing the same essential work across the infinite pages of the cosmic library. The isolation she had carried for decades, the weight of being one of the few who remembered the truth, evaporated in that single, breathtaking moment. They were part of a community, a chorus of weavers all tending to their own sections of the grand tapestry, their collective efforts creating a harmony strong enough to keep the great silence at bay. The message was not just an announcement. It was an invitation into a fellowship she never knew existed, a new chapter where the defense of reality would forever be a shared, cosmic endeavor. The cosmos breathes a quiet, steady rhythm now, a testament to a victory no one else will ever see. Aris Thorne is gone, his consciousness forever woven into the quantum fabric, a silent sentinel whose sacrifice became the anchor holding all of creation together. From his timeless post, he mends the small, fraying edges of reality with the gentleness of a gardener tending to a vast, living garden, ensuring every story has the soil it needs to grow. And on Earth, Lena's network of sentinels thrives, a distributed web of watchful eyes ensuring the burden of salvation is a shared trust, never again to fall on one pair of shoulders. This quiet, ongoing partnership between the Weaver and the Watched is the ultimate resolution, a powerful reminder that knowledge, when paired with profound courage, can steer the universe away from the brink of silent oblivion. We are left not with an ending, but with a new kind of beginning, a cosmos that is cared for, a story that is actively cherished. It leaves us with a profound sense of awe and a haunting, beautiful question. If one man's sacrifice could save everything we know, what other cosmic mysteries are waiting just beyond the edge of our perception? What other silent wars are being waged? And what other incredible truths are hidden in the starlight, eager for the next curious mind to discover? The universe is not a cold, empty void. It is a story, and the next chapter is yours to